Of Saddam Hussein on our TV screens when they shone a torch in his mouth so we could all recognize him by his very distinct tonsils. I have no doubt they really did catch and eventually hang Saddam Hussein, but bin Laden, do us a favor. The reason they gave for not showing pictures of the dead bin Laden was it might cause Al-Qaeda to carry out a revenge attack. It might threaten national security. I've never heard such a stinking crock of shit in all my life. Why then did they show pictures of Saddam Hussein after his death? And why did they show the mangled faces of his two sons after they were murdered, both before and after makeup? Another aspect of this story, which the mainstream media is conveniently ignoring, is the fact that bin Laden has died before already. In December 2001, he died of Marfan syndrome after spending time in a hospital in Dubai where he was visited by the CIA. It's incredible to watch just how low mainstream journalism has now stooped. Although I would contend there is no real journalism. The codes of journalism state, public enlightenment is the forerunner of justice and the foundation of democracy. The duty of the journalist is to further those ends by seeking the truth and providing a fair and comprehensive account of events and issues. Conscientious journalists from all media and specialities strive to serve the public with thoroughness and honesty. Professional integrity is the cornerstone of a journalist's credibility or incredibility. So we can all agree there are no real journalists. As I said to my mother the other day, if I were to enter an establishment and be offered a copy of the Daily Mail to read, I would be less offended than if someone served me a plate of dog shit in a restaurant. A NASA administrator, Charles F. Bolden, recently made a chilling announcement by video to NASA employees. He said that the people should know stuff and be prepared. Be prepared for what exactly? He spoke of the well-being of people not only here on Earth, but off this planet, but did not mention the space station nor the space shuttle. He said, think about the natural disasters that could occur in your area. He said, think about attacks that could come from outside sources like 9/11, but he did not mention terrorists. He asked people to prepare for the unforeseen. Develop a family preparedness plan in your house. Have an emergency kit available. What the blinking heck was he talking about? Nobody seems to know. Do the puppet masters writing his script know something that we don't? Is this predictive programming for a fake alien invasion? You can be sure that with the military organization NASA, what you get is NASA, never a straight answer. Thank you very much. I'd just like to start by thanking each and every one of you for coming along this evening, because these events are very important for me for a few reasons. Firstly, I don't actually get paid any money at all for the TV shows that many of you probably watch. And the only money I make from it is by selling DVDs on the channel, and I have to share half of the proceeds from that to the channel. And the amount that I make on that is probably equivalent to feed an average dog. So events like this allow me to make a little bit of revenue, which enable me to keep the TV show going. And of course, it also gives me a chance to meet people who are watching the show, people who are interested in and concerned with the types of issues that I'm covering, which I believe are the most important issues on this planet. And it also gives people who are interested and concerned about these issues to meet with each other, because a lot of the dialogue on these subjects is carried out over the internet, and people are faceless on the internet. But it gives, and I hope people meet with other people of like minds and share information, because I've actually obtained a lot of information from these talks from people who have just come up to me at the end and said, Richard, I've got something to tell you. So they're extremely important in my opinion. Now I just want to speak about fear before I go into the talk, because some people would come to one of these talks and they would say, well, that guy's just spreading fear. That's all he's about. He's a fearmonger. I believe that there is an agenda of fear, and that those behind the veil, the cabal, we could call it that, use fear to control people, to control the masses. They use it through a variety of means. Fear of war, or terrorism as it is now called. Fear of debt by an orchestrated financial system. Fear of disease by things like swine flu. And I believe that these are all deliberately orchestrated to keep the public in fear so that they're easier to control. But I would argue that the other thing that breeds fear is ignorance. If you're ignorant of something, you don't understand it, you're going to fear that thing. And what I'm trying to do is get closer to the truth on many of these issues and bring that to as wide an audience as possible. And by getting rid of the ignorance on some of these subjects, that then alleviates the fear. So I would argue that it might not be good news, some of it, but the more well-informed people are, the more we get rid of this fear, which is how they're trying to control us. So it's a very important point, because the power lies with the people. It doesn't lie with the people who actually are trying to create this fear. Their power comes from the fact that we allow them to have our power. Now, I've split this evening up into two sections. The first I've entitled Agendas of Man, which is about agendas of man. Now, the second part, so we're going to have a short break, maybe a 15-minute break after I've spoken for about 50 minutes. And then the second part, I'm going to discuss off-planet agendas, which is UFOs and the secret space program. And I just want to start with a saying from George Orwell: during times of deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. And obviously I get lots of correspondence, and you might think a lot of it is critical because of the controversial things I'm coming out with. 98% is positive. But I think we need to convert more people with this information. Okay. Now, the agendas of man. Now, if we just go back to previous empires, the Roman Empire and the British Empire, we can study these empires that tried to take over the world, because we've got an empire now which is trying to take over the world, and it's called America. Now, I don't really want to go into too much detail of who's really behind America, but essentially it's America's foreign policy, which is trying to take over this planet. And as I said, if we compare that to previous empires, the Roman and the British Empire, we've got some fundamental differences. And these differences, I believe, are technology and the media. Technology meaning the internet, mobile telecommunications, and the media. And these differences between the past and now make the chess game completely different. So there's a lot more skullduggery, there's a lot more hidden things going on behind the scenes because we live in a very different world to the previous empires. And I hope to try and shine a light on some of that in this presentation. Now, as I said, I believe the US has a goal for world domination, and that much of what we see on our TV screens in Libya, in Yemen, all around the world is basically a symptom of America's goal for world domination. A vast amount of the world's news and wars are basically a result of this policy. If you dispute that America has a goal for world domination, you've just got to look at how many military bases it's built around the world. It has 737 military bases. It has bases on every single continent. I don't think any other country comes anywhere near that. No country comes close. This map shows how many troops and bases America has stationed around the world. It has bases in 90 countries and 2.5 million troops on the ground. In Britain alone, it has 35 military bases. Now, what allowed America to build up a lot of these bases was the Cold War, because there was this perceived threat of communism. And they built many bases during the Cold War under this remit that we were under threat from this evil thing called communism. Now, that all ended in about 1990, and you would have expected America to close down some of its bases because the world was seemingly a more peaceful place. But that didn't happen. In the late 90s, American neocons started planning the new threat, which was to become terrorism, which they've used as an excuse to build even more bases. And they've even spelled it out in one of their documents. Now, one of the strategies that America uses in order to expand its empire militarily across the world is what's called false flag terrorism. And I'm going to read out this Wikipedia definition. Many of you in this audience will be aware of what false flag terrorism is. But if you tap the average person on the shoulder in the street, they'll say, "What the hell are you talking about?" They don't know what it is. And I'm just going to read this out. False flag operations are covert operations designed to deceive the public in such a way that the operations appear as though they are being carried out by other entities. The name is derived from the military concept of flying false colours, that is, flying the flag of a country other than one's own. False flag operations are not limited to war and counterinsurgency operations and can be used in peacetime. Now, that's a Wikipedia definition. Now, I'm just going to highlight the key, what I think is the key word in that definition: to deceive the public. Because these kind of operations do not work unless the public is deceived, because the public would not, no member of the public would support a false flag attack, i.e. countries killing their own people, blaming it on someone else, an excuse to go and attack them. So the public has to be deceived in order for a false flag event to work. Now, how do you do that in a democracy? Well, what they've done, and I believe they've done this across the board, is they have to have control of mainstream media with regards terrorist activities. So they deceive the public because I believe intelligence agencies have absolute control when it comes to these subjects, war, terrorism. They have control over the mainstream media, and that's how they deceive the public. They don't deceive all of the public, they don't need to. They only need to deceive 95%, which is what they do in the mainstream media. Now, there are many, if people say, well, that's rubbish, how can a country possibly kill its own people? Well, I've got some news. The history is full of examples of this, and I'm just going to put a few up on the screen. 1917, Woodrow Wilson, who was the American president, he ordered that an American passenger ship be loaded with explosives and sailed into German waters. It was then bombed. After that event, the intention of that event was to get America to join the war effort, and 1 million people signed up because they thought that their ship had been torpedoed, but it was done deliberately. 1931, the Manchurian incident. This is when the Japanese government blew up one of their own railways in order to blame it on China and go and invade an area of China called Manchuria. There's Adolf Hitler did it. This was instrumental in him coming to power and becoming a dictator. His main opposition was the Communist Party. His operatives set fire to the German parliament, the Reichstag, and they blamed it on the communists so that they can go and lock them all up. And that was instrumental to him coming to power. Now, one of the most important, I think, is Operation Northwoods, which was a plan by the American government. Now, this plan was signed, it was drawn up by the American Chiefs of Staff, and it was actually signed by the Defense Minister. And they were going to blow up their own army bases, and they were actually going to bring down their own passenger airliners and then blame it on Cuba. So this was a plan, pardon me, which did not go into operation because when President Kennedy got sight of it, he disapproved it. But if it wasn't for Kennedy, that operation, with similarities to 9/11, knocking passenger airliners out of the sky, that didn't go ahead. But it's been released under Freedom of Information. Now, I would argue that many, or probably all, of the Al-Qaeda attacks that we have seen on our TV screens are false flag. And I would argue there's actually no such thing as Al-Qaeda. Well, I'll explain that in a minute. So why do our democratic governments need to use this false flag terror? Well, it's to do with democracy, in my opinion, in that no democratic country would ever approve of such an evil thing. And I would summarize it's to circumvent democratic scrutiny. So in other words, it gives them an excuse to invade a country, because I believe that the leaders that we have, even though they're supposedly democratically elected, they are just as psychopathic as some of the leaders that we've had in previous empires. But because we have this phony democratic system, they have to weasel a way around it. And this is why they need this. They need to fool the public to get round democratic scrutiny. And as I said, I believe every Al-Qaeda attack has been a false flag attack, based on evidence that I've researched. Now, where does the term Al-Qaeda come from? Now, after the London bombings in July 2005, this man, Robin Cook, who was a very high-profile member of the Labour government, he wrote an article in The Guardian the day after the London bombings. And he said, Bin Laden was, though, a product of a monumental miscalculation by Western security agencies. Throughout the 80s, he was armed by the CIA and funded by the Saudis to wage jihad against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda literally means the database. That's what Al-Qaeda means. It was originally the computer file of the thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with help from the CIA to defeat the Russians. So this is a word which has been made up by America, and it just means a list or a database. That's all it is. There is no organization calling itself Al-Qaeda. Every time I see or hear the BBC News using this word, I laugh my head off. It's the phoniest thing. Basically, Al-Qaeda is an extension of America's foreign policy. It's a word that they use to describe anyone who doesn't agree with their policy for world domination. Cook went on to say, so long as the struggle against terrorism is conceived as a war that can be won by military means, it is doomed to fail. Whatever else can be said in defense of the war in Iraq today, it cannot be claimed that it has protected us from terrorism on our soil. 1 month after that article was written, he was dead. He was out climbing in the hills with his wife, and he had a heart attack. Now, call me a conspiracy theorist, but I think he was probably murdered. And if you think that they don't have technology to be able to induce a heart attack, do some research. Now, the organization which I believe was instrumental in creating these false flag attacks, more recent false flag attacks, is the Project for the New American Century. This was an American think tank consisting of neocons, people like Dick Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, and they were formed in 1997, and they wrote a document in 2000, about a year before 9/11, where they basically spelled out what they were going to do. It was entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses. Now that's really incorrectly named because it was all about how they were going to wage war against the world. In that document it spells out that because the Russian threat of communism is now gone, they were then going to create more wars on multiple fronts and use this opportunity that communism went in order to create a world power. And one chilling extract from this document states, "The process of transformation," this is America's military taking over the world, "even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent of some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor." They were spelling out what they were going to do in 9/11 a year beforehand. Now, Aaron Russo is well, he's dead now, but he made a film called From Freedom to Fascism. I recommend everybody watch it. It basically describes what I'm talking about. He met with one of these very high member of the cabal, if you call it. It's the people who sit behind a veil, members of Council on Foreign Relations who basically steer the American government. And before 9/11 occurred, he was told by Aaron Russo about 9/11, that it was going to happen. And he spoke about this in a telephone call. This is from the Zeitgeist movie. But remember this, what he's talking about took place before 9/11.
This is Aaron Russo, a filmmaker and former politician. To his left is Nicholas Rockefeller of the infamous Rockefeller banking and business dynasty. After maintaining a close friendship with Nicholas Rockefeller, Aaron eventually ended the relationship, appalled by what he had learned about the Rockefellers and their ambitions.
I got a call one day from an attorney woman I knew, and she said, "Would you like to meet one of the Rockefellers?" I said, "Sure, I'd love to." And we became friends, and he began to divulge a lot of things to me. So he said to me one night, he said that there's going to be an event there, and out of that event, you're going to see we're going to go into Afghanistan, so we can run pipelines from the Caspian Sea. We're going to go into Iraq to take the oil and establish a base in the Middle East, and we're going to go into Venezuela and try and get rid of Chavez. And the first two they've accomplished. Chavez they didn't accomplish. And he said you're going to see guys going into caves looking for looking for people that they're never going to find. You know, he was laughing about the fact that you have this war on terror. There's no real enemy. He's talking about how by having this war on terror, you can never win it because it's an eternal war. And so you can always keep taking people's liberties away. And I said, how are you going to convince people that this war is real? He said, but the media. The media can convince everybody it's real. I mean, you know, it's just that you keep talking about things. You keep saying it over and over and over again, and eventually people believe it. You know, you created the Federal Reserve in 1913 through lies. You create 9/11, which is another lie. Through 9/11, then you're fighting a war on terror, and now all of a sudden you go into Iraq, which was another lie, and now they're going to do Iran. You know, and it's all one thing leading to another, leading to another, leading to another. Now, I would say, what are you doing this for? What's the point of this thing? You have all the money in the world you ever want. You have all the power. I said, you know, you're hurting people. It's not a good thing. And he would say, what do you care about the people for? Take care of yourself and you take care of your family. And then I said to him, what are the ultimate goals here? He said, the ultimate goal is to get everybody in this world chipped with the RFID chip and have all money be on those chips and everything on those chips. And if anybody wants to protest what we do or violate what we want, we just turn off their chip.
Okay, that was Aaron Russo, who I think died in 2007 of cancer. Let's just put yourself in the shoes of someone who's going to carry out one of these false flag attacks. So you're going to target a specific group of people, the Twin Towers, for example, or the London Tube, and you're going to murder them. You're going to be quite worried that people aren't going to believe your story if you're fabricating something. So one thing that they do, and any psychologist will tell you that this works, is called predictive programming, where they put things in people's minds so that they're more likely to accept that event when it happens, if they've already had that information go through their head some months earlier. And there was a TV program which was aired about 4 months before 9/11 called, I think it was called The Lone Gunman. It was a spin-off from the X-Files. And I've just clipped together some extracts from this TV show that was shown in America 9 months before 9/11.
These look like Counterterrorism scenarios, war games developed for the Defense Department.
What's scenario 12D?
Airline terrorism?
Why is that important enough to kill for?
Because it's no longer a game.
If some terrorist group wants to act out this scenario, why target you for assassination?
Depends on who your terrorists are.
The men who conceived of it in the first place. You're saying our government plans to commit a terrorist act against a domestic airline?
There you go. Indicting the entire government as usual. It's a faction. A small faction.
For what possible gain?
The Cold War's over, John. But with no clear enemy to stockpile against, the arms market's flat. But bring down a fully loaded 727 into the middle of New York City, and you'll find a dozen tin-pot dictators all over the world just clamoring to take responsibility and begging to be smart-bombed.
I can't believe it. This is about increasing arms sales. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you tell the world this? Go to the press.
You think I'd still be drawing breath 30 minutes after I made that call? The press? Don't be so damn naive. I don't have all the specifics on scenario 12D, but I think I know the flight they've chosen.
You said they intend to bring this down in the middle of New York City? What if there is no bomb?
Well, how are they going to bring it down?
Same way a dead man can drive a car.
Remote access. Somebody on the ground's flying your plane.
I've just stopped the action there. I've compared this trajectory of the plane hitting the South Tower with the actual plane which hit the South Tower. Look how similar that is. This is what actually happened on the left. This is 4 months before 9/11.
Byers, your flight's gonna make an unscheduled stop in exactly 22 minutes.
Corner of Liberty and Washington. Lower Manhattan.
World Trade Center. I'm going to crash the plane into the World Trade Center.
And kiss your asses goodbye.
Finally, we're getting close. Testify. You're going to let them cover this up.
They almost killed me twice. They won't fail a third time. My silence will keep me alive.
Of course, there's no concrete proof that that was predictive programming, but it's a damn coincidence if it's happened. And of course, they did the same with the 7/7 London bombings. About a year before the 7/7 London bombings, there was a panorama program which envisioned 3 tube stations being blown up by 3 Al-Qaeda suicide bombers. Okay, now let's just talk about briefly Osama bin Laden. I mentioned him in the introduction there. Evidence linking bin Laden to the 9/11 attacks. Now, that slide's actually totally accurate the way it is, because there is no evidence linking bin Laden to 9/11. The evidence that they actually purport links bin Laden to 9/11 is a video which was found in a house on a VHS tape in Jalalabad. Now, I've got a document here which anyone can come and have a look at. Bin Laden made 3 videos in October, November, December of 2001, which it was bin Laden, and in those videos he spoke about the Palestinian plight and about the oppression of Muslims, the Israeli situation. He did not mention 9/11 in the 3 other videos. And if you compare them, the guy in the one that claims to be a confession, it's not bin Laden. It's proven to be not bin Laden. It's a completely different man. I mean, yeah, he's got a long beard, but the similarity ends there. And this is the only piece of evidence linking bin Laden to 9/11. He never knew any of the alleged bombers. He never communicated with any of the alleged bombers. And this is something which the mainstream media just completely bypasses, that there is no evidence linking bin Laden to 9/11. And I'll just, obviously, I've got an hour for this talk. I can't go into 9/11 is a massive subject, but I'm just going to list some of what I would call the smoking guns of 9/11 evidence. The first is the collapse of the towers themselves. There are competing theories in the truth movement as to how the towers, let's just say, it went away. They were standing 1 minute and then they weren't the next. There are competing theories. But I think everyone in the truth movement agrees that a passenger airliner, which is like a very, very light aluminium tube, cannot cause those towers to collapse in the way that they did. We've heard reports that 11 of the alleged suicide bombers were still alive, and one of them, the lead hijacker, Mohammed Atta, his father reported that he telephoned him the day after 9/11, telling him that his life was at risk. We have the Pakistani intelligence who wired $100,000 to the lead hijacker, Mohammed Atta, and the 9/11 Commission, which was hand-picked by George Bush to investigate 9/11, said that they weren't interested in the funding sources behind 9/11. Now that's just crazy. Why wouldn't you investigate the funding? And I would suggest that Pakistani intelligence have links with the CIA, so that money is probably being funneled through intelligence agencies. And the hole in the Pentagon can't possibly have been made by a passenger airliner. And we've got the Building 7 collapse. Building 7 was a 47-story building near the Twin Towers, which collapsed sometime later, hadn't been struck by anything, and it collapsed at free fall speed, which looked like a controlled demolition. But it would be impossible for a building to fall without being hit or something being pre-planned. Now, interesting, the BBC actually reported that this building had collapsed 25 minutes before it had collapsed. So they were given the script before the building had collapsed. And again, this is something that the mainstream media, they've tried to explain it away. And the explanations that they come up with are preposterous. And I'm going to show the clip of the BBC actually reporting that this building had collapsed 25 minutes before it actually collapsed.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash.
News is continuing to come in, as you can imagine. We're now being told that yet another enormous building in New York has collapsed. It is the 47-story Salomon Brothers building.
Now, I think it was only in 2007 when somebody actually picked up on that footage that the BBC had reported this, and the BBC were asked if they could replay that clip, and they actually said that they'd lost the footage. Can you believe that? The most important day in history this century, and one of the world's largest media organisation lost the footage. And then when they were challenged, they then said, oh no, we put it on the wrong shelf and we couldn't find it. And again, this kind of thing is not highlighted in our mainstream media. Now, let's just discuss what the motives for the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq have been, because I don't believe it was to defeat Al-Qaeda, because Al-Qaeda doesn't actually exist. Now, Nicholas Rockefeller mentioned in the clip that I showed with Aaron Russo that it was to establish bases in the Middle East. And this links in with the map that I showed you earlier about America's goal for world domination, because they have bases obviously in Europe, in South America, and in parts of Asia. And the Middle East was probably the next step that they wanted to expand their empire into. And of course, it's got resources of oil and gas around the Caspian Sea. Possibly also to control the drugs trade in Afghanistan. Many people believe that the CIA control the majority of the world's heroin trade. And there are heroin traffickers who have been recruited by the CIA. This testimony is known about, where you'll get a heroin trafficker who will be arrested by the CIA, and then the CIA will say, well, look, you can either go to prison for 20 years or you can come work for us. And then they obviously obtain their black budget from the heroin trade. The heroin production in Afghanistan has gone up since 9/11, not gone down. Now, with their technology, their satellite technology, how easy would it be for them to identify every poppy field producing heroin in Afghanistan and just eradicate it? But poppy production's gone up. Another interesting theory is that if we consider ancient Samaria and theories of people like Zachariah Sitchin, they claim that there is ancient technology in Iraq, buried in archaeological sites, which possibly contain either instructions or advanced ancient technology. Now, the Baghdad Museum is a place where that kind of stuff would exist, and it's been theorized by people that this is one of the reasons for the invasion, because what happened when they got to Baghdad, that museum was looted, and you would have expected that would be one of the first places that the troops would have defended. So possibly it wasn't looted. Possibly the archives there and the relics were possibly stolen. But certainly not to defeat Al-Qaeda. I just want to talk about WikiLeaks, because I'm sure you've all heard of Julian Assange, and he was kind of a bit of a hero in the media. Now, last year he released what are called war logs. Now, these were they put them out on their website. This guy is basically he's not a whistleblower, but he encourages whistleblowers to come forward and ensures their anonymity and allows them to produce or put out secret government documents. Now, some of the documents that he produced last year were war logs. Now, every time something happens in Afghanistan, let's say they raid a village or something, they kill 10 people, that goes down in a log. So they have to log how many people were murdered, they have to log what weapons were used, what weapons were fired, who was involved, where it was, what time it was, and that goes down in a log. Now, Assange was leaked 90,000 of these logs, 90,000 incidents in which American operations had took place in Afghanistan. Now, that equates to about 40-odd incidents every day. So the amount of data that this guy leaked was phenomenal. You could build a picture extremely accurately over the years what happened during the Afghan war, and when you look at it, basically they're committing mass genocide. It's as simple as that. They take very few prisoners, for example. But Assange, and I was, when I saw that, I thought that's incredible that he's managed to leak this, and I thought what a brave man and all the rest of it. But he made one comment last year. He got into bed with and started working with The Guardian and a German newspaper and an American newspaper. And he came out with a statement that he was asked about 9/11, and he said, well, we deal with the real conspiracies at WikiLeaks, not I can't remember the words that he used, but he basically said that 9/11 was a false conspiracy. There was no conspiracy involved in 9/11. And at that moment, this guy's credibility just went straight down the drain for me. Now, I don't know whether he's been some kind of operative or agent from day one, or whether he was compromised once he's got into bed with The Guardian and these other mainstream newspapers, and they've said to them, look, maybe they've said to him, right, okay, we'll publish this, that, and the other, but you don't go near 9/11. I don't think we can trust this guy, and all this stuff about this rape, I just think that's all orchestrated. The war logs seem to be extremely important information, but who knows? I suspect Assange is a way of having a controlled opposition, if you like. Now we come on to the next false flag terrorist attack, which is the 7/7 London bombings, which I've covered a lot on my TV show. And again, on a forum like this, I haven't got time to go into all of the detail, but briefly, on the day of 7/7, there was a mock terrorist training exercise organised by Visor Consultants. And Peter Power, who was organising those mock terrorist training drills, stated that the actual place where the actual bombs were detonated were precisely at the same targets that the training exercises had. Now, that should set alarm bells running off for everyone, because this is how they orchestrate these false flag attacks. It enables them to control those sites. They've already got control of the cameras. They've got control of the police in those areas, and this is why they orchestrate false flag attacks in this way during training exercises. There was flaws in the timeline, and there is no genuine CCTV evidence of any of the alleged bombers at King's Cross before bombs were detonated. Now that's a very important statement, because the BBC keeps showing this phony clip, and they also show clips from a previous date when they're talking about the 7/7 date. And there's a very important fabricated CCTV image taken at Luton Station. That itself, that one fabricated image, is the authorities trying to pervert the course of justice. They've put out a doctored image of these alleged terrorists. And there was reports on that morning of alleged bombers being shot at Canary Wharf. If they've blown themselves up on the trains, how can they be shot at Canary Wharf? Another major flaw in the official story. And also on one of the tubes, there were actually 3 large holes in the floor. How can one suicide bomber create 3 holes several yards apart from each other? Okay, now I just want to read a little bit from Nick Collestrom's book. Nick Collestrom he lives in London, and he's been researching 7/7 since it happened. He's attended all of the various trials. He's attended the inquest. He's an academic. He was at Imperial College London, and he's written a book called Terror on the Tube. Now, in this book, I just want to, about a week, 8 days after the 7/7 London bombings, both the police and the media went up to Beeston. That's part of Leeds, where 3 of the alleged bombers lived. This guy on the screen, Mohammed Siddiqui Khan, him and a friend, one of the other alleged bombers, I will not call them bombers, they worked at a place called the Iqra Learning Centre, which was an Islamic bookshop. And the police and the media went there 7 days after 7/7. I'm just going to read it. Its owner, Naveed Fiaz, was arrested under anti-terror laws and taken to 10 days of solitary confinement at Paddington Green. The press arrived at the shop. Now, what the press said was that they were using, the shop was basically recruiting youngsters and filled them with anti-Western messages. But in fact, the shop, all it was doing was selling like peace material, like George Galloway DVDs and John Pilger's films. Now, what happened was, they basically, the guy who owned the shop, the media turned up because they wanted to do a news story about this alleged shop selling propaganda. The guy turns up with his key, and he says, right, I'll open the shop for you if you want to get some footage of what we're selling here, what we're doing. It's just some of it's Islamic literature, some of it's anti-war material. And the police said, no, we don't want you to open that. The guy's standing there with his key. We're going to blow the door in, and the media are going to film it so it looks like they're doing a raid. The guy's standing there with his key, and they smashed his shop up. I'll just read this. Locals believe the police raid on the bookshop was orchestrated for the media. They had the key to the shop, but they used a battering ram to break down the door anyway and pulled the shutters off, says Mohammed. The media were there waiting for them. It was all done in front of the cameras, Tanvir added. The police just chose to raid that shop as a publicity stunt. A guy from the bookshop was saying, here's the key take a look, it's not a problem, but they refused. The police went in there and blew the doors off. So this is the kind of tactics that our police and media are up to in order to try and convince people of these false flag attacks. Now, there's a key piece of evidence which wasn't discussed at the recent inquest into 7/7. It's not been discussed at length in any newspapers, and it's CCTV evidence of a black Jaguar at Luton train station. Now, Luton train station is where the 4 alleged bombers arrived in 2 separate cars, met there, they parked their cars in Luton train station car park and then got the train to London and then allegedly set off their bombs. But there's a black Jaguar car identified, and it's clearly part of their operation. It was there, parked on the day of their dummy run, and it was also parked in the same place on the day of 7/7. And various portions of this CCTV footage have been removed. The police, the media, and the inquest are not interested in this clip. This is a key piece of evidence in 7/7, and it shows that authorities or some kind of minder was involved in controlling the alleged terrorists. At 6:49, reparked his car, captured here on CCTV. 3 minutes later, there is an 88-second gap in the CCTV sequence, which has been removed by the authorities, during which the Jaguar drives in and parks 50 yards away in the same car park, in the same place it parked during the dummy run 9 days earlier. Why have they removed the part of the film of the Jaguar arriving? Shortly after this, the second of the alleged bombers' cars, a Nissan Micra containing the remaining members of the team, arrive from Leeds. Immediately, the headlights of the Jaguar switch on and it starts driving towards where the 2 cars are now parked. Just as the Jaguar approaches the 2 cars, again the CCTV cuts out for another 76 seconds. Look carefully at this image. Is the Jaguar driver keeping to the left because they are intending to park next to the alleged bombers' 2 cars? Very possibly. In the next CCTV image available, we see the 2 cars still parked and an additional car, which could be the Jaguar, parked next to them. So neither the police nor the inquest are bothered about who's in that Jaguar. And it has been suggested that it was Peter Power who was running this terrorist drill. Now, we don't know that. We don't know that for sure. I'm currently trying to find out what kind of car Peter Power had. And if that can be proven, or if we can find who was driving that Jaguar, it could blow the official story right apart and provide proof that it was an intelligence plot. Now, I just want to come on to the next false flag attack I'm going to talk about, which took place in December 2009. This is known as the Underpants bomber. This was on a flight from Amsterdam to Michigan. I've done a little graphic here. I just want to point out, they are not my underpants. I wouldn't be seen dead in a pair of those. Mine have got Buzz Lightyear on the front. Okay. Now, what happened was this young black man boarded this flight without a passport, and he sat towards the front of the plane, and then as it was coming into land, he started setting off some kind of explosive in his pants. Now, this guy, this witness here, Kurt Haskell, who's a very astute guy, he's a lawyer. Now, he's one of the key witnesses to this because he was at Amsterdam airport while this black man was being allowed onto the plane, and he claims that the man got onto the plane without a passport. And Kurt Haskell explains what happened on the Alex Jones show.
Okay, so before we boarded, obviously we're in Amsterdam. It was just my wife and I. There weren't any seats in the boarding area, so we sat on the floor by what I would call the ticket agent, the last person that checks your boarding pass before you board the plane. We're about 10 feet away or so, just playing cards. And, passing time, and I was kind of people watching, and I saw these 2 men approach the ticket agent. And they just kind of caught my eye because it seemed strange to me that they were together. One I would describe as, he looked like he was a poor black teenager is how I would describe him, 16, 17 years old or so. And the other man looked like a 50-ish, he looked wealthy. What I would say Indian man now, whether he's of a similar race or something, I don't know. But to me, it looked like he was from India. And they approached this ticket agent together. It was quiet, and I could hear the entire conversation. Only the Indian man spoke, not the black man. And what he said was, this man needs to board the plane. He doesn't have a passport. The ticket agent then responded, well, if you don't have a passport, you can't board the plane. And then the Indian man responded, he's from Sudan. We do this all the time. And the ticket agent then said, well, you'll need to talk to my manager or something along those lines, and pointed the two men down a hallway to go speak to the manager. They then proceeded down the hallway. This was the only time I saw this particular Indian man. Shortly after they went down the hallway, we boarded the plane. I can see three possibilities, and which one you think it was, I don't know. Three would be there was a bribe, there was some sort of personal relationship between this man and the security manager, and number three would be that this is a regular routine procedure to get on planes without a passport for refugees of war-torn countries.
Well, it's not. They've got to get special letters from the embassy. That's yeah, go ahead.
Pick which one of the three you think it is. To me, those are the only choices.
Or he was an intelligence agent telling the young fool he was part of a drill.
Okay. It was a really uneventful flight. We're in the middle of our descent into Detroit. The pilot comes on the speaker, and he says, we have 10 minutes to landing. Flight crew, take your seats and buckle up. A flight attendant walks by my seat, mumbling to herself, something smells like smoke. I look up. I'm in row 27. I could see smoke coming from row 19, 8 rows up. It wasn't a lot of smoke at that time, and it looked like it was coming from the floor, but I couldn't see the floor because I was sitting down. So I unbuckled my seatbelt, took a few steps up the aisle to get a better look, and then it burst into flames across the floor, the seats, and up the wall to the ceiling. When it burst into flames, people were screaming, "Fire! Fire! Terrorists! Water! 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 We need water! Somebody get water!" Flight attendants were screaming. The pilot comes on the intercom and says, "Emergency landing," and starts speeding up. And while this is going on, the terrorist man's being hauled off into the first class area by a couple passengers.
Now, after Kurt Haskell started giving out this information, he was interviewed by the FBI, and they started showing him photographs. And he testifies that he felt the FBI were trying to trip him up. In other words, they were trying to get him to misidentify something in order to discredit him as Okay, I just want to talk about the media now. Because obviously, without the control of the media, false flag attacks can't happen. And I've spoken in the past about media infiltration by intelligence agencies, because I believe that's how it's done. I believe it's the intelligence agencies are involved in controlling our media. Although a lot of people in the media, they just poo-poo that theory. They go, oh, I worked in the media for years, and I never had any interference or anything like that. Yeah, that may be so, but you're possibly in a category of someone who's not important enough to be controlled. I think it's just key people who they recruit. And it's well known that BBC graduate trainees, journalists, art producers and drama directors are screened by MI5. David Shaler, in his book, he exposed certain MI6 agents working at the Sunday Telegraph. Now, this man, John Snow, he was approached by MI5 in 1976. We know this because John Snow has given testimony saying that MI5 approached him and they said, will you basically work for us? Now, what would they be wanting to control him for? Put out the news in a way they want him to, perhaps feed back information. But they offered John Snow £3,600 on top of his original salary, which was £3,600. So they offered to double his salary. The taxman wouldn't know about it, and all he had to do was basically comply with what they wanted. But John Snow at that time in '76 said, no, I don't think that's good for news journalism. It's not right that I should be in bed with intelligence agencies controlling the news. And that's the only reason why this story got out, because John Snow said no. Now, he worked for ITN at that time. If you want to control the media, what would be the point of controlling ITN on its own? It would be you wouldn't get anywhere. You'd have to control BBC, Channel 4, Channel 5. So I believe there are key figures. A lot of them are anchormen, I believe. I've got no proof of this, but I just go by this story that MI5 are known to have tried to control key figures in the media. And every time I look at these faces on the TV, that thought goes through my mind. How many of these clowns are claiming that second salary? Okay, now I just want to talk about what I call the phony bone of contention. Because in television and radio journalism, it's considered good journalism having all sides of the argument. If you get two people with opposing views and you let them have a debate, it makes everyone informed because they can hear both sides of the argument, and then that means that you're informed. But what they cleverly do on the BBC is that they make the bone of contention phony. I'll give you a good example. In Libya, in us invading Libya, they'll have one guy arguing, I think we should arm rebels so the rebels can get rid of Gaddafi. And the other guy's arguing, no, we should bomb them and send in our own troops because less lives will be lost doing it that way. And they have this big debate. So they've already assumed that it's correct to go invade a sovereign nation. They don't have that point of view. So in other words, it's a phony bone of contention, or I call it a phony bony. And Radio 4, even Question Time, Newsnight, they just watch how they orchestrate their debates and ask what it is they are debating. Are they really debating this subject? And they do it with the economy as well. They never debate the real issue on the economy. And I'll come on to, I've spoken mainly about false flag terrorism, and I believe that those who are controlling our government, they have other methods at their disposal. And I'm not wanting to create fear here. I'm just wanting to try and highlight what I believe is the case so that people are informed. I believe they have, as I mentioned, they're using the economy, and we've seen this in Greece. Because if you model the current economic system that we have now of issuing currency as debt and using a fractional reserve system to put money in this, you model that mathematically, it can only end in collapse. And what you hear on the BBC a lot of the time is, oh, this unforeseen economic problem in Greece or Ireland. It's not unforeseen. Do you think the people who run those central banks think it's unforeseen? I think they knew years ago what they were doing in these central banks. But do BBC journalists put that point of view across? No, they don't. It's also unforeseen. I don't believe any of the financial states that we're in now is unforeseen. I believe they're people who know exactly what they're doing. These are not stupid people who are controlling central banks. That's the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, and the Federal Reserve. I mean, we talk about chemtrails and also health. You know, I believe that they're doing things with, for example, fluoride, possibly dumbing the population down. I also believe they have the ability to manipulate the weather. Now, these are highly controversial claims for which there isn't massively strong evidence for, but I think this is areas of research that need to be exposed. Earthquake weapons, possibly, and also electromagnetic weapons, I believe. They have that, and people like Stan Dale have spoken about this, and bioweapons. Now, we all remember the swine flu scare a little while back, and I just want to talk about that because I think one of the agendas of people who, as Ian Crane says, believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom, those people, I believe, are interested in controlling the world's population. And again, I'm not scaremongering here. I'm going to show a clip of Rima Libo, who spoke to a doctor. Sorry, she is a doctor and she spoke to a head of state in her surgery. And this is what a European head of state had to say.
Dr. Libo, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Governor. Well, first of all, let's start with the fact that the World Health Organization has decided that we have 90% too many people. Let me tell you a story. In 2003, I had a patient in my drug-free medical practice who was a head of state. And one day she said, you know, it's almost time for the great culling to begin.
The what?
That's what I said. The what? She said the great culling, C-U-L-L-I-N-G, when you thin the herd. I said, what are you talking about? She said, it's almost time for the useless eaters to be culled. And she said, those are the people who are consuming our non-renewable natural resources. I said, who are the people who make this decision? She said, we, the aristocrats.
This person you talk to, you're bound because you're a physician and
Correct.
There's the relationship that you can't talk. Is this person a member of the Bilderbergs?
She is not Queen Beatrice. She is not the Queen of England. She is not Henry Kissinger. But she certainly presented herself as a member of that power elite, and she certainly was a head of state. Now, the Bilderbergers are much talked about at this point. I said, who's behind this? And she said, well, you've heard of the Bilderbergers, of course. I said, are they the people at the top? She said, no. According to what I was told by this woman, there's a council of 7 men, and they make long-term decisions about what they want to see happen, which country rises, which country falls, which economies prosper. And it's really important to understand that these people have no affiliation to a religion, no affiliation to a nation, no affiliation to a political party.
They're rogues.
They are acting according to their own rules, and their rules are not the ones that the institutions we believe in adhere to. They will induce a pandemic using the nasal mist vaccine, which is a live attenuated virus. That means that if I take it, I can infect you. Men and women will sicken and die, and those who survive will be infertile.
And quite recently, I saw on BBC News that Bill Gates, the second richest man in the world, was wanting to inoculate or vaccinate people. And I basically don't trust him. I believe there's an agenda behind that, possibly depopulation. Gates is known to have spoken about his concerns about the population. Now, how many have heard of the Jane Burgermeister story? Is that many people heard about that? Because I believe this has already been attempted. I believe mass genocide of the human race has already been attempted in February 2009. In 2009, Baxter, the pharmaceutical organization, they created some vaccine in Austria, one of their labs. that was sent out to 16 labs across Europe in 4 different countries. One of these labs in the Czech Republic injected, as a routine test, injected the vaccine into some ferrets, and all the ferrets died. So they then examined this vaccine, and it was found to contain live avian flu virus, not vaccine, virus. Now, the bird flu is a completely different beast to your seasonal flu or your swine flu. If you get bird flu, I think there's something like a 60% chance you will die, and you will die painfully. Now, this virus was found in the vaccine. Okay. Now, if that vaccine had gone out to, let's say, 100,000 people, then there is a very high chance that a large section of the world's population would have been wiped out. Because if H5N1 is put into enough people's bodies along with the normal flu virus, eventually they mutate. I'm not a biologist, but this is what I've learned, and create a mutated virus, which could transmit the same way that seasonal flu can, but kill you in the way that bird flu can. So this cocktail that was sent out to these labs was recalled because this lab had spotted it. This is deadly if you inject this into people, or potentially deadly. And Baxter said, oh, well, that was an experimental vaccine. This is the excuse that they used, but they didn't deny it. Now, this is reported in the New Scientist, so this isn't conspiracy theory. This is true. This was the New Scientist reported this, that this deadly virus was in, and there was 72 kilograms of this vaccine produced, which went out of these 16 labs. But I think Baxter denied that it was for any kind of flu vaccine, like seasonal flu vaccine. They said it was experimental. Now, why would they send it to 16 labs, and why would they make 72 kilograms of it? This is the question. Now, in the summer of 2009, this is when they were saying, we're all going to have this swine flu vaccine. Now, I was aware of this Burgermeister story, and there's no way I would have got the vaccine, knowing about this mistake, alleged mistake, of Baxter. So I wanted to basically get them to cover it on the BBC News. I wanted the 10 o'clock news to tell the public about this mistake from Baxter, because I believe that the public had a right to know. So I got the phone number of the BBC journalist that writes all of the health news on the 10 o'clock news. And I recorded the telephone call. And all I was wanting the BBC to do, I wasn't necessarily saying, look, I want you to say there's been an attempt at mass genocide, although I think that there probably has been. I was wanting them to report this mistake by Baxter. I'm going to play the telephone call.
Hello. Hello, is that Kate? Yes. Kate, it's Richard Hall here. I sent you an email yesterday about the story about H5N1 in flu vaccines.
Yes, you did. And in fact, I've read through some of the documents.
Yeah, okay. So what do you think the chances of actually covering it on the news on the news is?
Not at all. I mean, we've done that. I mean,
well, what was the reason? What would the actual reason for not covering it on the news be?
Because it's out there already. That this is old. This is.
But the BBC haven't covered it on their main news programme. I mean, surely it would warrant something on the 10 o'clock news. I would have thought.
Well, we haven't got. I mean, the sort of Baxter immediately came out with a response to it. It needs more of an investigation. I mean, it is out there on our websites, etc.
Okay.
Every bit of news that goes out, we can't absolutely cover, but it has been out there on the website. I am passing it on, and this happened back in February.
What are your thoughts on how this could have happened?
Well, I mean, I had no idea. I mean, this is the thing, is that, Baxter have offered two explanations. Mm-hmm. And, I could get a crystal ball and start, sort of thinking about it, but that would absolutely, provide,
mm-hmm.
No point. You actually, what we deal in is facts. And what you'd need is an actually investigation. I mean, the two documents that you sent me, well, the first one was 100 and some pages, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So to actually sort of expect a 2.5-minute program to do justice to both sides.
So do you think it's newsworthy just the fact that this Austrian journalist has filed these charges?
No, I don't, because if reading what the Austrian journalist has done, looking at it on a balanced view, I would sort of, if I just read that, I'd say I'm not interested, because, I mean, the conspiracy theory is phenomenal. I mean, basically, she's accusing who and of genocide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't think that's possible then?
Well, it's possible, I guess, but, you know, going in at it like that, I'm skeptical, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Anything's possible, but I would be very, very skeptical of it, and I would want to know what her motivation is.
Mm-hmm.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
I wouldn't just go in and report that. I would, you know, as a journalist, I trust nobody, you know.
What about the fact that Baxter have actually admitted that live H5N1 was found in their vaccine? Is that newsworthy?
That has been up on the website,
right.
and it wasn't it's not a vaccine.
Right.
It was an experimental vaccine that was never meant for humans.
Okay. So why was there 72 kilograms of it sent out then, if that was the case?
I don't know. This
right.
is what I'm sort of, at the moment, I'm doing 2 other stories
right.
for today for the 6th and 10th.
Just bearing in mind that Baxter are creating this new, the swine flu vaccine, that people really should know about this mistake when they make their decision to go and get this vaccine. That's what my point is, that it should
they're not necessarily creating it. They're manufacturing it, which is something different.
Okay. They're manufacturing it then,
yeah,
and they're implicated in these 2 incidents. So people should really know this before they are compulsed to go and get their vaccine.
Yeah, as I said, we look at any story on merit, and government minister may make an announcement, and we decide not to go with it because there is a value judgment made at that time. It might not make the 10 o'clock news, but it's there on the website. And, you know, the whole thing about our website is, you know, it is the most touched on news website in Europe.
All right, then, thanks so much indeed. Right.
Take care, bye.
Bye.
So there you go. Now, I just want to finish this section by saying that if all of this is true, what I'm coming out with, how come there aren't any politicians banging their fist on the table in Parliament wanting answers about false flag terrorism, wanting answers about the Jane Burgermeister story? And I'm going to offer some explanations. The first is that I think most politicians are also victims in the same way that most of the public are, that they just believe what's put out by the media, and that probably encompasses the vast majority of politicians. The ones that are informed, that do realise that there's something going on, I think probably most or all of them, they're basically just not brave enough to stand up and speak the truth because they would know it would threaten their career. And I just want to give a little analogy of what I think our Parliament has turned into. Let's just say you've got a cage with 6 monkeys in it. In that cage, there's a big tower inside it, and there's a banana at the top. And one of the monkeys says, right, I'm going to have that banana, and he climbs up the tower, but halfway up there's this invisible force field that gives him a massive electric shock, and he comes tumbling down. And the next monkey thinks, well, I'm going to have a try at that. He tries, and the same happens. A third monkey tries, and the other 2 monkeys jump on him and say, no, you're going to get an electric shock. So these monkeys, they just leave it be. They then take one of the monkeys out of the cage and they put a new monkey in. The new monkey sees the banana and he starts going up to get the banana, and the other monkeys, they all jump on him and say, no, don't do that, you'll get hurt, you can't get that banana. So the monkeys in the cage have indoctrinated the new monkey with their doctrine, with their information that they have, that there's a force field there. You then take out another monkey and put a new one in. Same thing happens, that monkey goes for the banana. The rest of them, including the new monkey, he's not quite sure why he's stopping that monkey going to get the banana, but he does it anyway. You replace another monkey, and then you replace them one by one until all 6 monkeys have been replaced. And each new monkey that comes in, they're all jumping on him. Now, you then switch this force field off so they can get the banana, and then you keep sending new monkeys in. And every time they jump on the monkey. So they're acting on false information, and they're all basically indoctrinating each other. The only solution to that system, to allow the monkeys to get the banana, is to replace every single one of those monkeys with a new set of monkeys. And that's what we need to do with our parliament. Which I've entitled Off Planet. And start with this phrase. All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. And I think this is the case with a lot of the information that I'm about to present to you. Okay, about a month ago, I think it was, maybe a bit longer, the FBI published a new website, set up a new website called The Vault, and it published a lot of its previous UFO files, some of them from Roswell, and it caused headlines like this in our mainstream media. But these files, they weren't ridiculed like they used to be in the media. It was treated reasonably seriously, and there was a couple of, in particular, memos from Roswell talking about the recovery of a disc at Roswell. But one annoying thing they always do, they always accompany it with this, this fake photograph of the Santilli footage, whatever it is. It's been proven to be a fake. So they mix fact and fiction. But having said that, they treated this fairly seriously. It was in the Daily Mail as well. I just want to ask the audience, why does people think they're doing this? Anyone got any thoughts on why they seem to be putting these stories in the media like never before? There's more UFO stories in The Sun than ever before, and also the Daily Mail. Does anyone have any thoughts on why we could be seeing this? Sorry? Softening the public up. Okay, Project Bluebeam, which is where they allegedly can create an image of the sky, in the sky, of a fake alien craft and fool us all into think we're being invaded. And anyone think that it's because they're going to reveal the absolute truth about what they know? Disclosure. Anyone think that? What they want us to know? Yeah. I mean, it could be another false flag. Now, in the first part, I spoke about fear and about how prior to 1990, the fear was communism, and it has turned into terrorism. Now, it's interesting that Osama bin Laden was, reported to be dead, and I can't help think that the terrorist threat is wearing a bit thin. That people are getting wise to the fact that Al-Qaeda isn't a real organization. Perhaps they're trying to orchestrate a new false threat. Now, I'm not saying that UFOs are not real, because if you were to take the UFO subject as a whole, all of the information that is known about, and there are thousands of books being written about UFOs and the abduction phenomenon, if you were to cherry pick all of the nastier bits of that subject, you could easily create fear with that information. And I'm not saying that's what they're planning. I'm just saying that to bear that in mind if the fear factor starts to be placed on UFOs, because I think that's certainly a possibility. Okay. Now I'm going to talk today in this section about alleged invention of anti-gravity technology, and I'm going to touch on a guy called Dan Sherman, who I believe his testimony sheds light on what's known as the abduction phenomenon, people who claim to have been taken by extraterrestrials. And then I'm going to talk about animal mutilation, because I think the two are possibly linked, and finish on crop circles. Okay, now two people who have spoken about technology which can be used to defeat gravity, i.e. when we travel into space, it's always rocketry. That's how we get the space shuttle into space. We use rockets. But these two guys, two extremely credible whistleblowers in my opinion, have spoken about technology which has been developed in secret, which doesn't need rocketry to get into space. It relies on, well, some call it anti-gravity. The first chap is Edgar Fouché, who worked at Area 51. He has produced paperwork proving he worked at Area 51, and a friend of mine knows Fouché very well, and he vouches for his authenticity. And Fouché disclosed information about a craft, secret craft called the TR-3B. And this is a flying triangle which is allegedly 600 feet in its length. And I'm just going to read a little bit about what Fouché says about it. He says that at the center is a ring where it's like a hollow donut, and it's pressurized to 250,000 atmospheres. And inside, there's a supercooled superfluid, so it's superconductive, spins around at 50,000 RPM. This is inside a magnetic field, which, and I'm going to read this here, he says, do not misunderstand, this is not anti-gravity. Anti-gravity provides a repulsive force that can be used for propulsion. The MFD creates a disruption of the Earth's gravitational field upon the mass within the circular accelerator. So he claims that this secret developed craft can reduce its own weight by 89%. Now, if you've got that type of technology, putting something in space is much easier than setting fire to hydrogen and oxygen in a rocket, which is what they still use, which is what they put out on display for the public. And the other man who claims that anti-gravity technology was developed from the mid-1950s onwards through the 1960s until he became involved in anti-gravity projects in Australia. And Standeo spoke in a documentary in 1977 about the program that he was employed in by basically a cabal, an organization which operated above national governments, which was developing anti-gravity technology. I'm going to show a clip of Standeo speaking in 1977. So this is over 30 years ago, this information, and I find Deo an extremely credible witness. He stands by everything that he says in this interview to this very day.
Proceeded to do private research in this electrogravitics, thinking that I had cracked the secret of anti-gravity all by myself, and jumping up and down in my father's labs and mines in Dallas. And one day I was approached by the government and a kind of an emissary from Dr. Edward Teller's office, Dr. James R. Maxfield. And he told me what I'd been doing in my lab, and the details of stuff I haven't even written down or told anybody. He knew, and he had other people like myself sponsored in this kind of research around the country, and that was the first time that I knew that the U.S. government was actively involved, had been, and was still actively involved in the control of gravity with electricity. You find that he was closely affiliated with Dr. Edward Teller, who was the kind of dubbed the father of the hydrogen bomb project in the United States, but he told me that Dr. Teller was the head of anti-gravity research there, had been, I don't know whether he still is. And again, in my ignorance, I didn't realize how much work had already been done and gone before me. I was just kind of on the periphery or the edge of this whole development.
That's a device to be able to make things like flying saucers fly, is it?
Yes. Dr. Tom Keeble in the Aeronautical Research Labs, he told me, yes, we know about the flying saucers your countrymen have built, and in England and in Canada. And in fact, we have film records of them here in the RAAF files. I said,
I want to stop you there.
Yeah.
Are you saying, Stan, that there are such things as, let's call them flying saucers, but they are built on Earth?
Yes. That doesn't mean that I rule out the possibility of other flying devices or intelligent beings visiting the planet either from the oceanic bottoms or deeper areas or from other areas in space. But I am positive that we have the technology, I can even name you the companies and people involved, in making high-speed electric aircraft that do look, strange enough, like a saucer. Also, it's a device to store energy in the form of motion, like of a small star or a big atom. It's called, this is a long word, an MHD plasma, magnetohydrodynamic plasma, like ball lightning, and it contains itself. But it's a way to turn all sorts of electricity into a high-voltage battery.
What sort of proof can one furnish for that?
Oh, good grief. The briefcase I've got down here is full of documented evidence that is not all secret. If you go to to the records of the New York Herald Tribune, the newspapers, and look for November 20th, 21st, and 22nd, 1955. There are 3 articles in a series on anti-gravity and the various companies and people involved in the research in the United States, Japan, Europe. The list is like a who's who of nuclear physics. It was written by Ansel E. Talbert, the science and aviation editor for the New York Herald Tribune at that time. You can look there. You can look in the electrical engineering index for that period between 55 and 58.
That's a long time ago.
Yes. 57, about March, the security curtain went down. And there were, at that time, over 100 published universities and organizations, including the Gravity Research Foundation, which is still operational in Gravity Village in the United States. There were over 100 of these things operating to develop gravity, the control of it as a power source and communication and locomotion, etc. You put yourself in the scientist's position in the mid-50s. What you see is that you've got a technology that, if announced to the public, would cause mass reactions in the economy, in social moves, in cultural reactions that could probably bring about the demise of the whole human civilization. They said, look, if we develop this, completely develop it into a social, technological, integrated model, away from the rest of people in islands or in back rooms, however we do it, keep it quiet even from the politicians. At some point later, after 1956, 57, 58, some point later we'll have it ready to announce to the world as a global system. Then all we've got to do is figure out how to convince them to give it a try. People at the levels that are covering it up, I know some of them personally, and they aren't, in my opinion, villains. They're very sincere humanists. They are trying to solve planet Earth, trying to bring unity their way. An organization, a group of scientists, academics, industrialists, he couldn't be exact. Now, he never put a name to it, but I said, well, do you mean like a club? And he said, yes, but no. We are aware of these problems, and we're trying to solve them in the best way we know how. But these people have all been working together as scientists who go above governments. And look, they're sincere. I can't blame them for doing this. It's just that they have lost control of what they tried to set up. In 57, the blanket went down with security, and there was no more reported news on it to say either that it was a dead-end research avenue, that everybody had stopped working on it, or that it was highly successful and there had been a few breakthroughs. There was just nothing. It went quiet. And if you go back in the period and look, you will see that for a number of years after 57, there was no mention of this sort of research in print. Behind the scenes, there was a lot of discussion, and even MGM Studios made the movie The Forbidden Planet, revealing at that time a lot, as though it were fiction, of the technology and why it had to be covered up. The new model for planet Earth using this technology must be independent of any established government or order. After 7 or 8 years, if you can hold the ruse that long, you explain to them, this is how we brought peace. I still maintain, I don't think that it'll work, because at the top, these organizations are fighting. The power politics involved in keeping the secrets that we now have across the planet have allowed, well, in my opinion, groups that aren't capable of handling control of the planet to take power.
So that was in 1977, Stan Deyo claiming that anti-gravity technology existed then. And he claims that these disks that they've developed, which can defy gravity, can be used, you put 3 of them together to make a triangle, and then you can put more to make a larger triangle. So they can be used in triangle format to make huge platforms. So you could make an anti-gravity platform the size of an aircraft carrier, which one would assume would just lift off the ground like this with whatever you wanted on top of there. So if this technology exists, it really it makes an absolute mockery of the rocketry technology that we see with the space shuttle and every other vehicle that's been put in space. I suspect that this, what we see on the screen here, is basically a cover project. The International Space Station and the Space Shuttle are technology to pacify the public. This is what our space technology is. When I suspect behind closed doors they've got technology that would just make that look like a Meccano set. I just want to make one point about making a space vehicle. let's just assume we've got an engineering workshop somewhere in Weston-super-Mare, and say, well, let's design a space station or a space vehicle. What would you need? Okay, you're going to need a power source. Everything needs some kind of power source. So what could we use? Well, solar panels are 10 a penny these days. So we buy some solar panels. And you're going to need some kind of enclosure, some type of airtight enclosure. Now, a liquid oxygen tank can withstand, I think, up to about 18 times atmospheric pressure. If you were to buy one of them second-hand, that would do as your enclosure for a space vehicle. That could keep you alive in space. Okay, you attach it to your power source. Now, but you'd also need something to control the air inside and also the temperature. So you use your engineering workshop, you buy your second-hand liquid oxygen tank and your solar panels, and you bash it all together. Like I say, you need some kind of environmental and air control system, perhaps something similar that's used on a submarine. Now, here's our space vehicle that I've just designed. Now, that vehicle would probably cost you maybe, I don't know, a few tens of thousands of pounds to build, but that would go in orbit and it would keep you alive for just very little money. The point I'm trying to make is the difficult bit in space travel and in space vehicles is getting into space, okay? And in the past, we've always used rocketry, which is probably the most difficult part of space travel is getting into space, getting back, getting outside of the Earth's gravity field and getting outside of the Earth's atmosphere. They're the hard bits. If you had a piece of technology that could take your homemade spaceship for a few tens of thousands of pounds and stick it in space, you could survive in that bubble. As long as you had something else to bring it back down to Earth, it would work. So the point I'm trying to make is that they have discovered technology which can raise things into space without having to set fire to gases like hydrogen and oxygen. Now, anyone wonder what happened to the old Wembley Stadium? I'm not saying that Wembley Stadium is in orbit around the Earth. What I'm saying is that I believe that they have the technology to be able to do that if they so wished. Okay, because as long as you've got enough of these anti-gravity disks and have them in a big array, then you could raise that into space. So it's anyone's guess as to what they have got in space in terms of platforms. And Gary McKinnon shed some light on this when he broke into NASA computers and he allegedly found a photograph of a UFO. But he also found information, lists of officers' names on NASA computers. And we all know, anyone who knows the Gary McKinnon story, how much he has been persecuted by the American government, to try and get him extradited. Now, the guy's gone through hell for what he found out. And this is what he found out. I found a list of officers' names, he says, under the heading non-terrestrial officers. It doesn't mean little green men. What I think it means is not Earth-based. I found a list of fleet-to-fleet transfers and a list of ship names. I looked these ships up. They weren't US Navy ships. What I saw made me believe they have some kind of spaceship off-planet, plural. The Americans have a secret spaceship, I ask. That's what this trickle of evidence has led me to believe. So I suspect they have a vast secret space program. And one might ask, well, where are these ships launched from? My best guess would be the South Pole. There are lots of rumours about bases at the South Pole and people who have spoken about technology being transferred to the South Pole. And what about funding? Well, perhaps they had funding from the Strategic Defence Initiative, and as I mentioned in part one, the black budget that they get from selling heroin. I'm going to talk about animal mutilation, something which I've been heavily involved with a group calling itself the Animal Pathology Field Unit. I'm just going to summarise the phenomenon, because this is something which isn't reported correctly in our mainstream media. Throughout the world, including parts of the UK, since at least 1954, animals known to be in perfect physical health are found dead with very peculiar injuries on and inside their bodies. The nature is surgical and cannot be explained with animal predation. This is confirmed by pathologists. Although thousands of cases worldwide are known about, no human being has ever been seen, caught or arrested for mutilation incidents. Orange spheres or white spheres are sometimes witnessed in the areas where animals are found. Now, I produced a film a few years ago about this called Silent Killers. This is about an hour and 10-minute film which charts the work of the Animal Pathology Field Unit, a volunteer group of people who will go out and investigate some of these animals that have had surgical procedures carried out on them. And I'm just going to list some of the characteristics of these surgical procedures that are found. Just to mention that that group in the past has had a pathologist working with them, Professor Tony Fremont, and one of his quotes of the things that they've looked into is that I don't see how this can be done by us. Now, the lady on the right here is Linda Moulton Howe, and she, in the 1970s and 80s, extensively researched and reported on animal mutilations taking place in the United States. David Caton on the left here in the UK. Now, that photograph there is that's what happens when a fox or something or a predator kills animals. There's blood and guts, and it's a mess. Another example there, shit, blood and guts. Now, just compare that with some of the injuries that are found on these animals with surgical precision holes in their body. Here's a lamb. Zoom in on that. Now, this lamb was found with this surgical hole in its body where the fur appears to have been removed as if it's been prepared for surgery. Now, the organs in that animal had been removed as well, and often what happens in these cases, internal organs are removed, large internal organs, through holes which seem to be too small for the organs to fit. And another interesting part, if you just look at the edge on that incision, it's actually sealed. So the Animal Pathology Field Unit, they believe that there's some kind of either high heat or some kind of laser being used to open up these holes. Various other characteristics also crop up again and again and again, and this is in various parts of the UK. There are hotspots. One of the characteristics is a jaw strip where animals have flesh cleanly removed from the bone. Here are some examples, and these are animals which the previous day are running around perfectly healthy. Now, that injury there is impossible to achieve with a knife. If you cut an animal's jaw to remove its jaw flesh, you end up with knife marks on the bone. These animals have their jaws stripped completely clean, which is inexplicable. That particular photograph there is from Dartmoor, and the Animal Pathology Field Unit, it took them 5 years of Freedom of Information requests to get these images of mutilated sheep. Quite often the tongue is removed with a clean incision. Now, here are some of the characteristics. There are never any traces of blood on the ground, and some of these animals are found to have most of their blood exsanguinated, so there's no blood left in the carcass at all, but yet there's not one drop on the floor. There's never any tracks or footprints found, often in remote, inhospitable locations. Lights are often witnessed, sometimes helicopters, but also sometimes orange spheres. And again, we've had unusual ground markings reported in these locations where these activities are going on, and here's some photographs of some. Now, the phenomenon is not limited to farm animals, wild animals, and domestic animals. It's a worldwide phenomenon, and the attacks are extremely covert in nature. There's very little evidence of people being seen or caught making these incisions, these surgical incisions in animals. There are hotspots of activity. Dartmoor, there's many cases of sheep on Dartmoor. There's a hotspot in Radnor Forest in Wales. Now, this guy, Lieutenant Philip J. Corso, who was involved in the taking technology from the recovered Roswell craft, alien craft, and deriving things like fiber optics and other technologies which were introduced into industry. This guy oversaw that project, And he has claimed, he's no longer with us, but in the past he claimed that he saw top secret documents in the Pentagon dated 1951 which stated that the animal mutilation phenomenon is an extraterrestrial phenomenon, which would explain why no one's ever been seen or caught in any of these incidents or arrested. And Timothy Good's book Unearthly Disclosure actually describes, I'm just going to read an extract for it, something which sheds light on the covert nature of these attacks. This is an attack which took place in 1994 in the United States. It says, during a wave of livestock mutilations in New Mexico, Colorado, and Nevada, Larry Gardia was checking a herd of cattle belonging to Esteban Sanchez in Luna Canyon, near Las Vegas, northeast New Mexico, when he heard a loud, dull hum like a transformer or the sound an arc welder makes. The cows began running away from the noise, but Gardia noticed that 3 of the cows appeared to be pulled by an invisible beam towards the sound. They were struggling and bawling and were pulled through the trees, said Gardia. I shot at the beam with a 30.06 rifle and the hum stopped and the cows stopped bawling. 1 cow was found dead and mutilated, another injured and another missing. So we can see there we've had people who've witnessed these things happening, but they can't, whatever's doing it is invisible. So it seems. And another investigator in the UK, who's a retired police sergeant, who had many, many cases of animal mutilation reported to him in the Yorkshire region, he reported on some farmers near the Whitby area in the northeast who were getting so sick of sheep turning up with these surgical incisions on their body, they were losing livestock, so they set up cameras, infrared cameras, to trigger, or infrared equipment to trigger cameras and try and capture evidence of it. And they staked out this field. So that this group of farmers stayed up all night. The camera triggered once, and all that was on the film was just a clouded image. And right below them, right next to where they were staked out, there was a mutilated sheep. So this sheds light on this covert nature for whatever is doing this. Now I tried to find, ask the question, has there ever been any witnesses to these events? And I managed to find 2 cases where this, allegedly people have actually seen this happen. One of them, I found, someone sent me this. This is Flying Saucer Review. This is a copy from 1978. Now there was a story in there entitled Poached, and written by Jenny Randalls. Now Jenny Randalls is a UFO author who is very skeptical of UFOs now, but this is in the days before she turned. And this what happened, there was these 4 young lads who were out catching pheasant, and they were hiding to try and poach these pheasant. And they witnessed a metallic glowing sphere, brightly glowing. It was like an arc welder. It hurt their eyes. And it was about 15 feet above the level of the river, and it just came along, and they were all absolutely stunned by it. They thought initially, it's a satellite fallen to Earth, but then they thought, well, no, it's been intelligently controlled. And it landed in front of them. This is an artist's impression. And what they saw, and this is corroborated by all 4 of them, and they weren't very willing witnesses. It took quite a bit for them to actually publicize their story. These 2 beings came out of this craft, and there was cows in the field next to where they were, but the cows seemed to be paralyzed, motionless, still alive, but motionless. These 2 beings got out of the craft, and they started laying out these rods, like metalwork, around one of the cows and building a cage around this cow. Now, at that point, they got so freaked out that they ran off. And anyone who wants to read this entire article about it, it took place in a place called Frodsham, which I think is in Cheshire. This was in 1978. Now, there's one other case which is that I'm aware of where someone has witnessed. This isn't obviously an animal mutilation case, but it's some kind of abduction. In 1983, Linda Moulton Howe reported on a case. Now, these drawings, when you get witness drawings, sometimes they look a bit wacky because they're drawn by the witness. But this couple witnessed flashing lights over their field one morning, and they actually witnessed, this is what they report, again, a cow seemingly immobilized but alive, and these 2 beings start moving their hands over the top of it, and they floated it into this craft where there was 2 other beings standing by. So they witnessed So there are at least 2 cases that I know of reliable witnesses that report a cow abduction, but not mutilation. And now I believe that I've been in touch with a guy in the States called Dr. Philip Duke, who has tried to piece together what's going on with these animal abduction and mutilations. And what he believes is that in the same way that the polio vaccine is grown inside a horse, he believes that these animals are being used to grow vaccines or some other kind of agents. There's some part of the animal's biology that is being used as a factory to produce something that they need. And how he explains the evidence is that they basically, let's say they're going to target a certain field of cows that they want to grow something inside, use the cows as an incubator, that they will put something inside the cows, an agent, or inject them in some way, something inside its body. They will then tag those animals with a tracking device in the jaw. 3 weeks might go by while the animal grows antibodies resistance against whatever they've put in the animal. They then use the tracking device to find the animal. They cut its tongue off. They then test the tissue of the tongue to make sure that it is what they want. When you go to the doctor often asks you to put your tongue out to assess your health, so perhaps that's why they cut the tongue off. They then exsanguinate the blood, take the soft tissue organs, and before they leave, the last thing they do is jaw strip the animal to take away the implant or the tracking device. That's how Dr. Philip Duke explains this evidence. Now, if you believe certain authors with regards to the abduction phenomenon, there is a worldwide abduction phenomenon, people are being taken, and he believes that they're growing antibodies in order to protect their abductees, that whatever it is that they're taking from these animals are being put into their abductees to give them protection, and he believes it's protection against HIV, or at least it's one of the things that they're growing inside these animals. Obviously, the animal pathology field unit that I've been working with, we're trying to get proof of this, but it's not easy, you know, because you go on a farm and you're asked to remove a dead sheep. I mean, I got warned off by my local animal health people. They said, I put an advert in the Farmer's Guardian asking for farmers to come forward with mutilation cases, and they rang me up and said, you do realise, Richard, it's illegal to remove animal parts from farms and all this, you know, so they try to warn me. But I think there's a definite link between the animal mutilation phenomenon . It's black and runny. It occurs naturally on Earth and resides mainly underground. If you set fire to it, it burns. If you put it in machines with wheels on, it makes them go, and it's used to make things, which we've all been brought up to love and crave. Black stuff, we worship you. Because the black stuff is so essential to our existence, world leaders like Hillary Clinton use it in a kind of weapon in their game to carry out a highly dubious agenda. You see, it's okay for everyone to have black stuff, but Hillary and her chums say they are not happy because Iran, who have lots of black stuff, is trying to make grey stuff. They don't want Iran to have any grey stuff because grey stuff is used to make nuclear bombs. Only America and their friends are allowed to have grey stuff, and they have more grey stuff than you can shake a stick at. But under no circumstances will America allow Iran to make its own grey stuff, even though Iran has made it perfectly clear it has no grey stuff, nor has any intention of making grey stuff. But Hillary and co. don't believe them, or so they say, and a while back told the countries of the world that if anyone continues to buy black stuff off Iran, America will stop buying their things. This is bad because countries like America to buy their things, even though they pay for them with useless pieces of paper. And so it was, until recently when it became apparent that many countries couldn't survive without their black stuff from Iran. There might not be enough black stuff to put in their machines with wheels, and it is costing too many pieces of paper. So Hillary came to the rescue and kindly said that 10 EU countries and Japan could continue to buy black stuff off Iran and America wouldn't stop buying their things. This might sound very trivial, petty and pathetic, and indeed it is, and it's one of the reasons why the black stuff you put in your machine with wheels costs so many pieces of paper. I'm Richard D. Hall and welcome to Richplanet TV. On today's show I will be screening the final part of my 2011 speaking tour, which was filmed at Weston-super-Mare in June 2011. Just a quick note about this year's speaking tour. I have secured venues for Dublin, Liverpool and Edinburgh, and I'll also be speaking at 10 further venues throughout the UK in May. So check the richplanet.net website for details of that. In previous shows, I have interviewed Tony Farrell, a principal police intelligence analyst who was sacked from his job in South Yorkshire Police when he tried to explain to the police that the London bombings in July 2005, where 56 people died, were most likely carried out by intelligence agencies and not by Islamic suicide bombers. For the last year and a half, Tony has been fighting a legal battle for unfair dismissal. He was effectively sacked for telling the truth. I can back up this statement by pointing you to a briefing paper written by the principal intelligence analyst, which can be downloaded from the link on the screen and contains his detailed analysis of why the London bombings were most likely an inside job. Now, Tony Farrell recently received his council tax bill, and I'm just going to read some extracts of a letter which Tony sent to the council in response to his council tax bill. I have reasonable cause to suspect that to pay it would involve committing an offence under the Terrorism Act 2000 section 15 in brackets 3, which sets out that a person commits an offence if he A. provides money or other property, and B. knows or has reasonable cause to suspect that it will or may be used for the purposes of terrorism. He goes on to say, as a former principal intelligence analyst for South Yorkshire Police, I have reasonable cause to suspect that our government are committing acts of terrorism. Most obviously, this is in relation to the London bombings of July the 7th, 2005, and the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq and elsewhere in the Middle East. The abject failure of Chief Constable Meredith Hughes, CBE, to investigate my disclosures with respect to the strategic threat from terrorism when I was a principal intelligence analyst renders that organisation complicit in countenancing the perpetuation of the cover-up of acts of terrorism. What is more, the abject failure of South Yorkshire Police to investigate my allegations on the strategic threat also renders that public-funded organisation which resides in Barnsley as complicit. Since a proportion of my council tax services contribute to South Yorkshire Police and South Yorkshire Police Authority, it follows that I would be committing an offence under section 15 in brackets 3 of TACT to make payments given I am now aware of this legislation and given I have reasonable cause to suspect. And we wish Tony well with his legal battle. The Daily Mail recently featured an article about the BBC moving a large number of its staff to Manchester. Apparently 1,500 BBC staff are being moved from London to Manchester, and many of the stars aren't happy about the move. Now, the thrust of the Daily Mail article was whinging about the fact that many people in Manchester are not being given jobs as a result of this move. It seems like it's just a wholesale move of the existing staff from London to Manchester. This made me curious as to the real reason why the BBC is moving its operation to Manchester. I think some of you probably know what I'm thinking about. Anyone with any inside information on this move, please get in touch via richplanet.net, because I personally doubt it is to save money as they seem to be claiming. Now, last year we saw UK student protests over exorbitant tuition fees, and in my experience, students on the whole are a very peaceful bunch and usually demonstrate peacefully. So during a peaceful student protest, would you expect to find agent provocateurs employed by the police, yes, that's right, employed by the police, to seemingly cause trouble and make arrests? Watch carefully at the shenanigans going on in this student protest. This video is from the YouTube channel Security9. See you after the break.
What job are you doing? Anyone get a photo of the undercover cop? Right here, he's here for the protest. Woo! Woo! Take your hood down, it's like a yacht. No protest. pushing my head down. I'm going to pull it up. Get out of my face, mate. I don't want to take a picture, just move it out of the face, alright? Deal? Just take it back. Don't get in the way, sweetheart, okay? Just stay back. Oh, sweetheart, mate. Oh, fucking kick. What you're going to do is you take a picture and just stay back, alright? Is that a fair deal?
Yeah, they are all undercover cops and there's an arrest being going on there, yeah. Hello guys, smile on the camera.
Bit of a joke, like, they were wandering in and out of police like just snatched them.
I want to change the subject a bit and talk about the abduction phenomenon. These are people who claim to have been taken, usually in their sleep, sometimes from their car, and have things happen to them. You know, we hear stories of women who are made pregnant on spaceships and give birth to hybrid children, presumably. Now, if someone is skeptical of this, and I do believe we need more evidence of this, I would recommend read Professor John Mack's books. Professor John Mack was a Harvard professor who was very, very skeptical of the abduction phenomenon. And he was sent, I think, just one by one, just under 100 patients. Now, he thought that these patients were all suffering from some kind of psychosis. And he just thought, well, maybe I'll write a paper on people who believe they're being abducted because they've got this psychosis. And one by one, after he'd investigated, I think it was around about 100 cases, he came out and he concluded that the vast majority of them were reliving or were telling him about real experiences. Some of them had physical marks on their body, and he, as I say, he was head of Harvard University's psychiatry department. You can't get much more prestigious than that. And they tried to get rid of him, but they failed. And I would recommend read any of his books if you want evidence that this abduction phenomenon is real. Now, one person that I think people overlook quite a bit in ufology is Dan Sherman. And I think his evidence sheds light on the abduction phenomenon, although he's not an abductee, he doesn't know any abductees, he worked for the military. And what happened to Sherman was he joined the military in 1982 as a young man. He was in the American Air Force, and he was given a top secret clearance, and he was drafted into a particular program where he was sent to a secret NSA facility, that's the National Security Agency. And he became involved in this secret project. And it was so secret that he was picked up from his hotel room each day in a blacked out vehicle, and he wasn't allowed to know any of the entrance points or exactly where he was going. And he was also given 2 jobs at this facility, or one of the facilities where he worked. So in other words, during the day from 9 to 5, he was working on, I think it was electronics intelligence work. He had a normal job, and then he would do another 8 hours in this secret job, and that gives them a cover story as to what his role was in the military. Now, he would be taken into this secret base, and he was trained on allegedly alien technology which the American government had been given to them. Now, it sounds far-fetched, but I find Dan Sherman, if you read his book, he is one of the most convincing whistleblowers, in my opinion. He's not tried to profit from his story. He's not particularly a conference goer, and his information, for me, is a concrete witness. I'm just going to let him explain the introduction part of his story.
And at some point, I was kind of led to another job, which was electronic intelligence. This job provided me access to a higher security classification, and so I got top secret clearances and SCI clearances. And so that led me into a world where well, to back up, the military kind of had a plan for me as it was revealed later on, but at this point I didn't know that was going on. But evidently, and it was after I had gone into this other electronic intelligence field, that I went to a school to get trained for it, and I was called into an office, a captain's office. He was in charge of the school, I believe it was, and I went into his office, and he revealed this amazing story to me. Evidently, at birth, or actually in the womb, I was genetically managed to have a particular ability, and this ability was what he called intuitive communications. And how this happened was, and this is where, you know, a lot of people roll their eyes, and I rolled my eyes at the time, and I was like, I can't believe this is happening to me. But he said that my mother was abducted when she was pregnant with me, and the fetus, which was me, was genetically managed, and he said everybody had this particular ability that I was genetically managed for, but mine was just heightened to an nth degree. I was at the school to not only learn a certain particular procedure for my job, my regular job, electronic intelligence, but I was also there to go to another school, which was to uncover this ability that I had. I had the ability, but it was like I wasn't able to control it or to know it was there until it was uncovered to me, or so I could practice at it, so to speak. So he told me where to meet the van and told me all the logistics of how it would operate, and I started going to a school that would allow me to uncover this ability and to practice it, and that was at nighttime. In the daytime, I was going to my regular schooling for the job that I was in electronic intelligence.
Okay, so when he went into this facility, he wasn't allowed to speak to anyone. There was only one other person in the room, and he was sat at a desk with a very large computer screen, and there was a box with a line in it. Okay, and he had headphones on. Now, in the headphones, there was a tone played, sort of musical tone, and he was asked to try and imagine that tone in his own mind. So, in other words, hum the tone, not audibly, but in his mind. And he was told that if he did it correctly, the line would move on the screen, would move down. And it took him weeks and weeks to get the hang of this, but eventually he mastered it. He could hum this tone in his head, and the line would move. And he wasn't connected to the computer in any way, he just had a pair of headphones on. So, because the computer system had an interfacing device added to it, which could read his mind, which allegedly, he claims, had been given to the Americans by ETs. So it was reading his brainwaves and feeding that into the computer. Okay, I'll let him explain a little bit more about that technology that he was trained on.
It was kind of like a biofeedback machine, but on a totally different level, because I wasn't connected to the machine at all. And it started out by having these boxes on a computer screen. I had these boxes and had an oscilloscope straight line through each one of the boxes. And I was told to concentrate on a tone that was being played in my ear on headphones, and the instructions were to mentally hum this tone. So if you think, that's a hard thing to do, is mentally hum. You're humming, yet it's not vocal and it's in your mind. But they said that's what you have to concentrate on, is to mentally hum. So I would mentally hum this particular tone that they would be playing in my earphones. And then at some point, I started to sense that the line that I was looking at when I was doing this was connected to my mind somehow, and that I could move it. But it took a while. It took several days for me to even, and that was just torture, 3 or 4 hours of just sitting there and mentally humming something for a couple days without any sense that something's actually going to happen. It's kind of like a sense of clicking. It wasn't an audible click, but it was like when you're up against this force, and then all of a sudden the force gives way, and you can go like, move your hand against that force, and move your hand quicker because the force has been taken away. That's kind of how it felt, is this resistance, and then the resistance gave way. And
so after he mastered moving one of these lines down, they put other lines on the screens and asked him to imagine humming a second tone, and he could move them independently. And then he eventually had a whole load of lines on the screens, and he could move them all up and down. And then at some point what they did was they showed him a whole load of pictures and emotions and things like that, which were associated with different combinations of these lines. So he was able to then learn an entire language of, well, what he terms it as intuitive communications, but it's essentially telepathy. So the computer system was able to read his intention and change things on the screen. But not only that, it was also able to feed things back into his mind.
This is an ability that is really, really concrete. I mean, it's like we are talking right now. You say something and it conveys a message, and it's a pretty solid message. If I need to clarify that message or ask you to clarify, I can ask you to clarify. But it's a very, very concrete communications that we're doing when we're talking. And that is the same way with the intuitive communications. There's no room for error.
Are you saying that you hear a voice in your head?
No, it's not a voice. The medium itself was not a visual medium. But when it got to me and my brain assessed that information, it put it into a picture for me so that I could understand, or my mind could convey, because I had to convey all these communications through a computer to some place that I have no idea where I went. But when I got a communication, I had to convey this communication. And so a lot of it was rendered in pictures in my head, but sometimes it was just rendered in language, English language. And sometimes it was rendered in smells even sometimes. I could sense a smell. The technology obviously came from the ET species that we were in contact with, but I wasn't at the school. I was not communicating with an ET. I was.
So he's mentioned there this, when he was being trained, he was trained for quite a few years at different bases in this technology, and they would send him messages through this machine, and he was told to type it into a computer. He had like a black window on the computer, and he would type it in, and he assumed that there was somebody else in the NSA basically reading those messages, checking to see if he'd picked up this language. But then at some point, I think he had to wait quite a long time for this active mission that he was in. He was taken to a facility where periodically there would be messages coming in. Now, and he believes that they were being communicated from an ET, directly from an ET, a telepathic message. Now, he doesn't know where this ET was situated. He says it could have been in the next room, or it could have been the other side of the galaxy. He doesn't know where it was, but he believes it was an ET, and he was able to actually have quite high-level telepathic communications with it at this facility. But he also talks about the specific information that he was being given as part of this program.
The whole point of me typing it into the computer, and so somebody somewhere could read it, was so that they could verify the information and for accuracy, because that's essentially what I was doing, was just honing my skills to make sure that I was accurately conveying the messages that were being conveyed to me. We had it was a C-van. It's called a C-van. It's kind of like a trailer but no wheels, and you go into it, and we had 2 stations in this van, and I worked one station and my partner worked the other station, and we couldn't be in the trailer apart from one another. We both had to be in the trailer at the same time. But he had no clue as to what I was doing with the Gray Project. It just so happens that some of that information seemed to me to be information about abductions. And that's the whole problem with this entire experience, is a lot of things just don't make any sense. I'm like, well, why would they be conveying that type of information to me? So maybe at some sort of future event, they were going to be using me to convey this type of information, abduction information. I have no idea, but I started to receive information, like you said, that really correlated to me, like it has something to do with abductions, because there were fields, so to speak, like when you're filling out a form, there were fields. Well, there were like these pieces of information that were like potentiality for recall. I remember that one, residual pain levels, and latitudes and longitudes. And so, I mean, maybe they weren't abduction scenarios or abduction information, but it really seemed to me that it was, because of the different bits of information that was being communicated.
Okay, so he was sent a string of information, and he received these messages fairly regularly before he started questioning them. Potentiality for recall. I mean, we know from the abduction phenomenon that people often have missing memories, that they go through pain as well, so there's a pain threshold. Now, we'll explain what I think this information is for. Latitude and longitude coordinates on the Earth of where the abduction is taking place and the date and time. Now, the string on the bottom here is an example of the data that he would be sent telepathically, that he had to type into this terminal at the NSA. This would then be sent to someone else, presumably at the NSA. He didn't know who they were, who would then interpret the information. Now, if you just look at that string, you've got a number, and then it says subject. Now, I think after the subject, that number, that identifies the person who's been abducted, /940107, that is a date, 7th of January 94, which is when he was on the program. 0430, that's the time. Potentiality for recall 72. So presumably if this is an abduction report, they've got a way of measuring how likely that person is able to recall it. Pain, residual pain, nerve response curve, body normalization, and then at the end there, the last string 03835 north, 14503 E east. So, for some reason, if this is true, there's some race giving information to the NSA about, we presume it's human beings who have been abducted. Now, Dan Sherman then, he got a bit concerned about this, especially things like pain thresholds coming through, and he started to question his superiors as to about what on earth it was that he was being used for.
Well, I mean, I didn't get hundreds of them. You know, I maybe got maybe a couple dozen or 3 dozen or maybe something like that. So it wasn't a lot of them. And to tell you the truth, I didn't really, until maybe I'd gotten a couple dozen of them or whatever, I didn't really start thinking, well, wait a minute, you know, it didn't really start dawning on me until I had received several of them that this might be something that is odd. And then right towards the end, and that's probably why I stopped getting them, is because I started to ask my handler about them, and what is this? What is this information? It seems like it's abductions, and it seems like there's pain, and you know, that type of thing. And the answer I always got back from my handler was, just communicate what you're told. You know, what is being communicated to you. Just communicate that to us, and don't ask questions. You're not here to ask questions. You're here to practice your ability.
Okay, and he was then taken off the project. Now, I'm going to try and give an explanation for this. In 1954, there was an alleged meeting with President Eisenhower. It's been written about by several authors. A meeting which took place between Eisenhower and a race of extraterrestrials. And there was a treaty drawn up, allegedly, in 1954. There were whistleblowers such as Phil Schneider who have spoken about this. Timothy Good has written about it through his contacts. And I believe there's a Cardinal McIntyre, who was the head of the Catholic Church in America. He has alluded to this meeting as well. Now, if you believe what people say about this meeting, this treaty that was supposedly drawn up, this is what was agreed, that there would be non-interference agreement between the human race and this race of extraterrestrials, that the government would help keep the extraterrestrials' presence secret, that there would be a technology handover. The ETs would hand over certain technology to the Americans, and that the US government would facilitate in the building of certain underground bases for these extraterrestrials. Now, some of the information that was allegedly agreed in this treaty is as follows. That these aliens, because the American military knew that abduction was going on, so this was obviously discussed, they could abduct humans on a limited basis for the purpose of medical examination and monitoring, with the stipulation that the humans would not be harmed, would be returned to their point of abduction, and that the humans would have no memory of the event. Okay? And this final bit, that the government requested that the ETs provide regular data on the abduction, lists of names, etc. So what I think this Dan Sherman thing is that's the ETs following up on their part of this agreement, that they are informing the NSA of their abductions as agreed in 1954. It does seem to tie in, and I think what's possibly happened, let's say that did take place, okay? The government has said, we want this information. Perhaps the extraterrestrial race has said, okay, we're not going to send it on your gas-powered electromagnetic waves. We're going to send it using our communication. You've got to learn our language, boy, if you want us to keep sending you information. And the Americans have maybe gone, well, how do you mean learn your language? Hence the technology handover for this biofeedback machine, and then the training of the likes of Sherman into this program, so that they've got people that can then communicate in their communication medium. Okay, and like I said, I think that the Dan Sherman story really is a big piece of the puzzle, which I think a lot of people overlook. Now, I made a film called Crop Circles, The Hidden Truth, where I interviewed various researchers, objective researchers who get down on their hands and knees and examine hundreds of these crop circles. And I can't go through, obviously, in this forum all the information, but I'm going to give you the salient points. The conclusions that I came to when having interviewed these crop circle researchers and also done a bit of other digging, is that some circles, they cannot be explained by people mechanically flattening them with planks. The vast majority are made with planks, and I'll explain why. But some of them can't be explained in those terms. To demonstrate this, I'm going to show you a crop circle, and I'd be quite interested to know if anyone has an explanation of how this could have been made.
What about the Ogbourne St George formation? Because that's another one that you believe that is a non-man-made.
Absolutely, certainly genuine formation. I mean, the main thing about that was the way the crop had been laid. It wasn't flat to the ground. It was laid like the grooves of a record, wasn't it, Dave? So yeah. The top bit of lay was probably only a few inches below the general level of the crop in the field.
To illustrate what Robert means by the grooves of a record, we can zoom into the circle in question. The arrow here shows where the photograph to the right was taken. From ground level we can see the disturbance has occurred just a few inches from the top of the crop, but this has a significant visual effect when viewed from above. Ask yourself, what could create this kind of effect? Certainly not a plank of wood.
Then the next band, slightly higher, then lower again, then higher, then lower, then higher. And so it goes on right across this circle. The effect is so delicate.
Now that is not typical of 99% of the circles which appear, which are flat to the ground and they have these physical board marks in them, okay, which is clear evidence of planking. And David and Robert there in that clip, they've examined hundreds of circles, and the vast majority of them, they find these giveaway bruise marks on the bottom of the crop which show that they've been boarded. So you ask the question, why is there hundreds of these circles being made by people? What's the point of it? Okay, because what I found in my film is that there is a well-coordinated, well-funded regime which commissions the man-made crop circles in order to confuse the media and public to lead them to believe that they're all man-made. And this is the group that make them. The guy in the middle, or the guy with the black t-shirt at the front there, is a guy called John Lundberg, and I believe up until fairly recently he was the main person involved in their team. They were known as Team Satan, a highly organised team who I believe were funded by MI5, and I'll come on to why I think that. Now, if we just look at the amount of crop circles, this graph comes from a researcher called Paul Weige, who died a couple of years ago in extremely mysterious circumstances. He was 43 and he walked in the sea. Now, I'm very suspicious about his death because I believe he was getting towards the truth about crop circles. Now, this shows how many circles have been produced from 1996 to 2003. And we can see there that on average, you've got about 100 circles per year, predominantly in Wiltshire. Now, if we just consider that graph, there's about 5 to 6 people required to, I mean, I'm talking about these complex Mayan designs, astronomical designs that appear every summer. 5 to 6 people, it takes them a day to produce a circle. The season for crop circles is about 120 days long. Now that's about, an average of about 1 circle a day that's being produced. And since 1993, that's like 17 years of this. Now, can you imagine someone doing that for nothing? Not every day going out, trampling these, getting pissed on by the rain. How long do you think it would be before this team would get pissed off? I think it wouldn't be long. In my opinion, this has to be a funded activity. Now let's just say that team requires funding. I would estimate, because the members of that team there, one of them lives in London, another one lives in Devon. They travel quite long distances to Wiltshire to make these circles. They will require expenses. I would estimate £1,000 a day is a fair estimate for how much that team would be paid. As I say, the season's 120 days long. That's £120,000 per season. It's my guess as to how much these guys are being paid. And over 17 years, that's a cost of £2 million. Now, let's just take a look at the ringleader of this group that are responsible, and they admit to being responsible for making hundreds of crop circles. You go on their website, they'll tell you how to make them. They'll show you that films of them making these crop circles. And Lundberg is, or was, I mean, I'm talking about from 92 to probably 2004, 2005. He was the main person, or the leader of that team. Now, Lundberg went to the Slade School of Fine Art and did a Fine Arts Masters. Now, this was his final year at university. Now, that's a map in red. That's the headquarters of MI5 at that time in 1991. And the blue is the school he went to. Now, intelligence agents often recruit their people in their final year at university. Now, that's no proof, but he was studying next door to MI5 for a whole year. And coincidentally, that was the year before he started making crop circles. This is the Crop Circle Makers website. In my opinion, I used to be a web designer, that site has been heavily funded. It's won lots of awards, and they have a source of funding, which they even admit to. Now, the other thing I just mentioned here is that in the past, although they've been removed, adverts on their site for MI5 careers have appeared. Now, here's some text. This is Paul Weiger here. That's the guy who's dead now, I was telling you about, who I think there's extreme suspicion about his death. This is Lundberg speaking on his website. This is the ringleader of the Crop Circle Makers. You'd be surprised how expensive running a successful website can be. Don't panic, we're not going to ask you for money. Our retainer from sources we'd rather not disclose has kept our virtual head above water. So he's admitting that he's funded and that he has a retainer. Okay, so as I say, John Lundberg, he's the linchpin, I believe. He's the leader of the team that makes these crop circles. And I'm just going to show you some other things I found out about him. Because I decided to find out where he lived. And I also found out information about 3 companies that he started, and all that information is in my film. He lives in London in a very posh flat. Now, I went to the land registry and got the deeds to his flat, okay? And in the block of flats where he lives, that's in red, there's about 40 posh apartments in London. I found that the apartment had never been bought or sold since it was built in 1995. All these other apartments had been bought and sold. There was a block of 4 which had the same anomaly. I thought, well, how can the flat not have been bought or sold? Not only that, the land that it was registered as being built on was incorrect. It was listed as being built on this blue property here, whereas all of the other properties were listed correctly. So I found a housing association which was listed as basically taking care of these 4 flats, one of which he lived in, incidentally, which would probably cost about £1,000 a month to rent. And I said, oh, do you have any flats to rent in that block? They said, yeah, we've got 4. I said, okay, can you give me information? They said, oh, they're not rented like a normal flat. I said, what do you mean? He says, oh, well, the rents are not paid for by the tenants. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they're either leased or they're paid for by the council. Okay, now I looked up the occupations of the 3 other flats. One of them was a microbiologist, one of them was an actor, and I forget what the other one was. And one of them was Lundberg, the crop circle maker. So in other words, they don't have occupations that would entitle them to housing benefit. So the rents are not being paid for by the council. So he's living in one of these 4 flats that have never ever been bought or sold and is not being rented, or it's been leased by some organisation. So I believe he's been given a free house by MI5, and I've uncovered 4 MI5 safe houses. And I've just recalled now what the occupation of the other person was in the 4th flat. She was a journalist, very active politically in the National Union of Journalists, and is on the Black Members Council. Now that's possibly someone that MI5 would want to keep tabs on. I actually contacted the head of the National Union of Journalists, and I told him about this. He was quite interested, but obviously there's no proof of this. But I believe that Lundberg has been getting free accommodation at the taxpayer's expense in an MI5 safe house, because he could not have earned any money with this activity. How is he living in a £1,000 a month flat in London? Okay, so the conclusions are that some crop circles cannot be explained by people mechanically flattening crop fields. Over 95% of crop circles are man-made by that group, or possibly other groups now. There is a well-coordinated, well-funded project which commissions the man-made crop circles in order to confuse the media and the public to lead them to believe that all are man-made, because I believe that the military are very interested in the real crop circle phenomenon. And we have to say that they've been totally successful with that disinformation campaign, because you ask someone on the street who makes crop circles, and nearly everyone will say, well, they're made by people. So they've been really successful in their disinformation. That group is funded to keep the public away from the real phenomenon, because, as I say, military helicopters have been filmed many times over some of the genuine formations. Okay, and just finish with this. All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident.